Isaiah Cole is a quiet black man with a government past now standing trial as a so-called public threat. But when a racist judge yells in his face calling him dangerous and disruptive, no one in that courtroom sees the truth. Isaiah was CIA trained, sent to expose corrupt judges just like the one shouting at him. He didn't come to defend himself. He came to dismantle the system from the inside. But how do you fight power when the law itself is the weapon? If that question hits you, like this video and share your thoughts. Now let's step inside the courtroom. They brought him in through the side door, the one they use for troublemakers, and I remember thinking, he doesn't look like trouble. Isaiah Cole walked with his hands cuffed in front of him, calm, steady, as if he had rehearsed this moment, not out of fear, but out of understanding. A middle-aged black man dressed in plain gray slacks and a worn navy shirt, eyes forward, jaw still. He didn't flinch when the heavy doors of courtroom 3B clanged shut behind him. He didn't speak. He didn't look around. But everyone looked at him. The charge sheet was thin but loud. Trespassing in a restricted area of the courthouse, they said. Disturbing the peace of judicial proceedings. Legal terms with sharp edges enough to raise eyebrows but not enough to make headlines. It was the kind of charge used to swat away the wrong kind of person who showed up in the wrong kind of room. And in Judge Barrett Trask's courtroom, Isaiah Cole was exactly that kind of person. Judge Trask didn't wait long. He leaned forward from his high bench, tapping his pen twice on the desk before raising his voice just enough to be menacing without shouting. "A black man like you shows up in this courthouse, and you expect not to be reported." His tone was smooth, almost professional, but it reeked of something far older, far uglier. He looked at Isaiah like he had already decided the story, and now he just wanted to hear how the actor would deliver his lines. Isaiah didn't answer. He didn't twitch, didn't blink, didn't even adjust the way the cuffs pulled on his wrists. He just lifted his head slightly and looked straight at the clock hanging above the judge's bench. A large brass antique, probably installed long before most people in that room were born. The second hand ticked with an audible snap, as if reminding the room that something was about to happen whether they were ready or not. Naomi Banks. The court clerk shifted in her chair. She had been typing notes without looking up, but something in the stillness caught her. She glanced at Isaiah and paused. It wasn't fear on his face, and it wasn't defiance either. It was something rarer, quiet focus, like a man waiting for the exact second to breathe. Her hands hovered above the keyboard, forgetting the next stroke. Boone, the courthouse security officer standing near the entryway, noticed it too. Boone was a tall black man himself, broad-shouldered veteran presence. He'd seen dozens of men come through this courtroom in cuffs. Angry ones, loud ones, broken ones. Isaiah was none of those. There was no tension in his shoulders, no protest in his posture. It was controlled. And that made Boone uneasy. Not because it was threatening, but because it meant Isaiah wasn't who the charges said he was. He didn't look lost. He looked like someone who had been here before. Judge Trask leaned back in his chair and smirked. "I see we're choosing the silent act today. That's fine. But don't confuse silence with innocence, Mr. Cole. Not in my courtroom." He flipped a page, though it was clear he wasn't reading it. "You're lucky we're only talking trespassing and disturbance. I've had folks like you face worse for less." Still no response. Isaiah just continued to watch the clock as if he knew something the rest of us didn't. There was no arrogance in it, no pride, only precision. The kind of stillness that unsettles people who rely on noise to assert power. There's something that happens in a courtroom when one person refuses to play the role they've been assigned. People start shifting in their seats. Whispering begins. The tension thickens. Trask's voice grew more clipped, as if trying to force emotion out of Isaiah with volume alone. But Isaiah wouldn't budge, wouldn't blink. He wasn't resisting the judge, he was outlasting him. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a man caught in the system. This was a man walking through it. With purpose, and patience, and a reason. None of us knew what he was waiting for, but the clock kept ticking. The prosecutor was already talking before Isaiah had even taken a full breath. "Gregory Flint, young, polished, and clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice, stood confidently before the court. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. Instead, he used his tone like a scalpel slicing Isaiah down with steady precision. "This is not simply a case of trespassing," he said, his words clean and rehearsed. "It's a deliberate breach of courthouse security by a man with no legal reason to be here." Isaiah didn't move. Flint kept going, hammering at institutional integrity and the risks posed by unauthorized individuals entering secure judicial areas. He framed Isaiah as a danger without ever saying the word directly. He never used Isaiah's name, only this individual, like he was a case file rather than a man. The room grew still with every sentence, not because people were convinced, but because Flint's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never been told he was wrong. Then Isaiah shifted ever so slightly. He turned his head just a little and began to speak. He didn't get far. Judge Barrett Trask brought his gavel down hard, the crack slicing through the silence like a warning shot. His face curled into something close to amusement, but his eyes held nothing but disdain. "You will not interrupt this proceeding," he said. Then, with a half smirk, he added, "A black man like you should know better than to think silence makes you look smart." The courtroom didn't gasp, but it went colder. Flint blinked, surprised, but said nothing. The line had been crossed, and yet no one moved to pull it back. Isaiah, for his part, didn't flinch. He closed his mouth, slowly lowered his gaze, and returned to that same calm stillness that had unnerved the room since the moment he arrived. He didn't look wounded. He looked prepared. Boone, the security officer stationed near the courtroom doors, narrowed his eyes. Something about Isaiah's posture, that steady presence, it rang a bell. Boone wasn't the kind of man who forgot faces. Years ago, during a brief assignment in D.C., he'd assisted with security detail at a high-profile federal trial. He remembered a man standing just behind the judge, never speaking, never drawing attention, just watching. Calm, focused, a presence. And now, looking at Isaiah, Boone felt that same quiet authority settle into the room again. But this time, the man was wearing handcuffs. Boone didn't say a word, but his stance shifted. He no longer watched Isaiah like a suspect. He watched him like someone trying to solve a puzzle he'd seen once before. Meanwhile, Naomi Banks, the court clerk, was still typing, though her fingers had slowed. She wasn't reacting to Trask's outburst. She was following a different thread. Something about Flint's timeline didn't sit right. She quietly pulled up the courthouse's internal security logs. The timestamps Flint cited didn't match the access records. A restricted door, supposedly forced open at 9:13 a.m., had no activity on the surveillance footage. She leaned in, cross-checking entry badges and camera feeds. Something was off, and Isaiah knew it. Or at least he acted like a man who'd already read the next 5 pages of this script. Somewhere in the gallery, a man in his 60s leaned to whisper to the woman beside him. His voice was hushed, but the words still traveled. "That guy doesn't look like someone who breaks into buildings," he said. "He looks like someone waiting for people to figure out who he is." The woman didn't answer. No one did. Because suddenly the courtroom wasn't sure what kind of story they were watching anymore. This wasn't a man crumbling under the weight of accusation. This wasn't a man asking for mercy. This was someone who had already decided how this would end. And yet he still hadn't said a word. Judge Trask shuffled his papers with irritation, trying to recover the upper hand. His tone sharpened like he was trying to remind the room where the power lay. But it wasn't working. Power had shifted the moment Isaiah walked in and refused to play the part. And somewhere behind all the noise, behind the gavel strikes and polished arguments, behind the smirks and whispered doubts, something had begun to fracture. Because sometimes truth doesn't scream. Sometimes it waits calm, patient, and lets others condemn themselves first. The tension in courtroom 3B didn't fade. It thickened. Isaiah hadn't moved since the judge's last outburst. His posture remained the same, upright shoulders, relaxed face, still as stone. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't performing. He was simply present. And yet that very presence had begun to unnerve the room in ways no one wanted to admit. Judge Trask slammed his palm down on the bench with a loud crack that echoed into the silence. The sound startled a few in the gallery, but Isaiah didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, fixed somewhere just above the judge's head. as if he were reading something none of them could see. Trask leaned forward, jaw-tight voice dropping into something colder, more personal. That smug look might work wherever it is you're from, but it holds no weight in my courtroom, he hissed. I don't care how calm you sit. You're not special, you're not clever, and silence doesn't make you innocent. Still no reaction, but that was the problem. Silence wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to feel heavier than the words being shouted at it. Flint, eager to restore the rhythm, stood again. He cleared his throat and raised a printed report, waving it like evidence that would seal the room back into order. Your Honor, what we have here is official documentation that places Mr. Cole within a secured administrative area of this courthouse at a time when no civilian should have had access. His presence was not recorded in the visitor logs. His identification did not register, and when approached, he offered no clear explanation for his actions. I submit to the court that this was not a mistake, but a deliberate intrusion. He handed the report up to the judge. Trask scanned it frowning, then glanced down at Isaiah as if expecting panic, a flinch, or at least a flicker of recognition. But Isaiah didn't panic. He didn't flinch. He just looked at the judge and finally, after what felt like hours of silence, stretched across 3 parts of this courtroom, he spoke. His voice was calm, low, and carried no tremble. Funny, he said, how access becomes illegal when it uncovers something inconvenient. No one moved. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. No anger, no sarcasm, just a quiet observation like someone holding up a cracked mirror to the system and waiting for it to admit what it saw. Even Trask blinked. And Naomi. She stopped pretending to type. She had already seen the mismatch between Flint's timeline and the security data, but now she leaned deeper into the system. She opened the courthouse's archive drives, the backups that only a few staff knew still existed. And there, buried beneath layers of misfiled footage, she found it. A hallway. A restricted wing. A man entering with a card that was accepted, not forced. Time-stamped. Logged. And clear as daylight, the face of the man was Isaiah Cole. She stared at the screen, heart beginning to pound, not because she was afraid of what Isaiah had done, but because she was beginning to understand what had been done to him. At the front of the room, Trask was trying to regain control. He began flipping pages again, muttering legal jargon, but the courtroom no longer leaned toward him. Something had shifted. The people weren't sure what kind of man Isaiah Cole was, but they were beginning to believe he might not be who they'd been told. And that was enough to make the silence feel louder than ever. The courtroom had gone still again, but not quiet. Not really. There was a tension under the surface now, like everyone was holding their breath, but no one could remember why. Even Judge Trask, who once held the room with nothing more than posture and a glare, looked momentarily unsure. He flipped through the report in front of him like it would realign the moment, but the air had already shifted. Then the side door creaked open. He didn't walk in with fanfare. No one announced him. No badge, no credentials. Just a man tall, black in a dark tailored coat, crisp shirt buttoned to the collar, every movement deliberate but calm. He walked like someone who wasn't looking to be seen but would be impossible to ignore anyway. He sat in the gallery, second row, hands resting gently in his lap. He didn't look at Isaiah. He didn't scan the courtroom. He looked straight ahead and waited. Judge Trask noticed him almost immediately, and the flicker that passed over his face was too quick for most to catch, but not Isaiah, not Boone, not Naomi, not Flint, who shifted in his seat like he suddenly remembered something inconvenient. Isaiah turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge the man's presence. But still he said nothing. Trask cleared his throat and spoke sharply as though trying to reassert the rules that had begun to slip from his grasp. Mr. Cole will refrain from further comments unless prompted by this court, he snapped, tapping the bench with 2 fingers. This is not a place for theatrical silence or defiance. And then the man in the second row spoke. His voice was even, not loud, but it cut through the room like it had weight of its own. Barrett, he said, eyes locked on the judge. You know who he is. The real question is, how long did you hope the rest of us wouldn't? Trask froze. He didn't respond right away. His lips pressed together like he was choosing between anger and panic. Flint stood flustered. Your Honor, I object to this disruption. But no one was listening to him anymore. Judge Trask turned toward the man in the gallery, his voice rising, tone sharp and trembling at the same time. Men like you, black men like you, come into my court thinking justice is something you're owed. Like it's some birthright or a favor people forgot to give you. But justice isn't handed out on demand. It's not some privilege you shout your way into. Boone near the doors tensed. That wasn't a judge defending his courtroom. That was a man being exposed and lashing out. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head just slightly and replied, "It's not justice we demand. It's the truth." And Isaiah Cole's presence here has made a lot of people very nervous, for good reason. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence where everything waiting underneath suddenly got louder. Isaiah still hadn't spoken again, but now his shoulders lifted gently as if exhaling years of weight. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his head and looked at Naomi. She looked back. No words passed between them. Just a glance. A moment. And then Isaiah gave a small, barely perceptible nod, and Naomi moved. Her fingers danced across her keyboard, precise and fast. She opened a hidden admin channel, one that hadn't been used in over a year. She attached the unedited backup video, the one no one was supposed to still have access to. The one that proved Isaiah hadn't broken into the building, hadn't forced his way past security, hadn't trespassed. He had walked in authorized, documented, purposeful, and she sent it. Not to the judge, not to the prosecutor, but to a secure federal portal. One that didn't ask questions, just timestamps. Judge Trask didn't know yet, but a chain had just been set in motion. A chain that wouldn't stop until it reached someone far above his bench. And still Isaiah said nothing. He just sat there, hands folded, head slightly bowed, not in defeat but in control, because sometimes the loudest man in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who already knows the ending. For the first time since the proceedings began, Isaiah Cole rose to his feet. There was no order from the judge, no permission granted, and yet no one stopped him. Perhaps because something in the air had changed. Perhaps because somehow they all understood that the man standing before them was no longer a defendant waiting to be judged, but a witness who had carried judgment in silence for far too long. He stepped forward, slowly, calmly, and then without raising his voice he began to speak. 12 years ago, he said my brother was arrested in a parking lot for a crime he didn't commit. They said he matched a vague description, tall black, wearing a hoodie. That was enough. No one interrupted him. I was 25 at the time, fresh out of the military. He was 19, no priors, no evidence, just the word of two frightened witnesses who had seen someone run. Isaiah's eyes didn't look at anyone in particular, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the gallery. It was as if he were speaking into the space itself, letting the room absorb it. They gave him 10 years, he continued, and when we appealed it was denied without review. 3 judges signed off on that rejection. His voice did not tremble. But in the pause that followed, something else did. He turned slightly then, and for the first time looked directly at Judge Trask. You were one of them. Trask didn't speak. Isaiah nodded slowly. I remember your signature. I remember your wording. No grounds for reconsideration. No grounds. That's what you said. No grounds. Naomi had stopped typing. Flint was no longer fidgeting with his notes. Even Boone near the doors seemed caught in the stillness. Isaiah glanced at the gallery, at Marcus, at strangers who had no reason to care, and then, almost as if he were pulling the memory from the farthest place inside him, he said, I remember my mother's hands shaking in that courtroom. I remember her trying to speak and the judge telling her to sit down. I remember her crying when we buried him 4 years later after he died in prison, alone. For something he didn't do. He paused. Grief teaches you to stay quiet, but injustice teaches you to listen. He stepped back, letting the silence settle before continuing. I joined the CIA not long after that. Became part of a small unit tasked with internal accountability. We weren't the ones who made headlines. We were the ones who made files disappear or reappear when it mattered. Quiet work. High clearance. I sat across from federal judges, listened to confessions made off the record. I helped bring down 3 of them. Quietly. Cleanly. Isaiah's hands stayed loose at his sides, but his voice grew firmer. I thought I was done. Then his gaze found Trask again, until I saw your name again. Same arrogance? Same pattern? Rulings that crushed lives with no explanation? Dismissals that served the powerful and silenced the broken. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. But this time I did not file a report. I didn't send a memo up the chain. You see, the people above me already knew about you. They just never thought anyone would bring you down where it counted. A beat. So I came here, not under orders, not with clearance, not to plead. He stepped closer to the bench, not threatening but unshaken. I came here because sometimes the only way to clean the rot is to cut through it from the inside. Trask's lips parted like he might speak, but no sound came out. Isaiah turned back toward the gallery, toward everyone who had heard him not as a suspect, but as a man. I'm not waiting for permission, he said. Not anymore. And then he said the words that would stay with everyone in that room long after the courthouse emptied. This time I don't need approval. I just need the truth to speak louder than I ever could. The room was still holding its breath in that way only a courtroom can, when the rules of procedure start to feel like the edge of a blade. Isaiah stood without a word. Calm, measured. His movements were deliberate but unhurried, as if he had rehearsed this exact moment down to the second. From the inside of his jacket, he pulled a small black USB drive and placed it on the clerk's table. He didn't explain, didn't gesture to it. He simply returned to his seat and sat hands folded, eyes lowered. For a moment no one spoke. Then came the laugh. Dry, dismissive Flint. That's it, he said, voice rising with mock surprise. All that build-up for a thumb drive? He turned to Trask with a smirk. We could have just asked him to mail it in. Trask leaned forward now, both elbows on the bench, his tone sharp. You came into my courtroom with this, he said. With your silence, your theatrics, your color, your arrogance. And you think this little gadget is going to shake a federal bench. Isaiah didn't look at him. He looked at Naomi. At that exact moment, Naomi's phone buzzed silently in her lap. One message. Encrypted. She knew that cipher. Marcus. 3 words. File uploaded. Confirmed. She stiffened, heart beginning to race. The USB on the desk was a distraction. The real upload had already gone through federal timestamp and all. The file wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the hands of the people Isaiah wanted it to reach. Naomi opened her laptop with care, fingers gliding over keys like a pianist preparing for a shift in key. She accessed the secure server Isaiah had embedded his digital thread into and found the file already verified and active. It was there. Surveillance logs, audio captures, courtroom footage that was never meant to see daylight. From the back of the room, Boone's radio chirped. Just once. A soft squawk. He moved to the side door and cracked it open. 3 men stepped in. No uniforms. No introduction. Their plain suits said everything they needed to say. They were from the federal end internal affairs, most likely. And they weren't here to watch. They were here to collect. Still, Trask tried to hold control. You think this changes anything? He snapped. You think silence and skin tone and one flash drive make me hesitate? His voice grew sharper, harder. I've seen stronger men crumble under this system. You're no different. Isaiah remained seated, his voice quiet but unshakably clear. You never understood, he said. This was never about convincing you. Trask's lips curled. Then who was it for? Naomi clicked open the video. At first, just static. Then a hallway time-stamped with Trask's voice echoing through the frame. He was laughing. They can barely spell habeas corpus, let alone deserve one, he said, referring to defendants. The system isn't broken. It works exactly how it was built. The courtroom monitors flickered with scene after scene. Trask signing off denials, ignoring evidence, holding private conversations with political donors. Lines crossed not just in judgment, but in motive, in ethics, in law. Flint's smile vanished. Trask went silent. The agents didn't move. They didn't need to. The weight of the truth was already pushing down. Isaiah finally looked up just enough to meet Naomi's eyes. She nodded, subtle, steady. And then he leaned back in his chair and whispered more to himself than to anyone else. The trick was never getting in. It was making sure no one looked away when the truth came out. The USB, still on the desk, still untouched, and absolutely meaningless, because the real move had already happened. And the court. The court wasn't trying a man anymore. It was trying to survive the sound of its own silence breaking. The monitors didn't blink. They rolled. Video after video. Frame after frame. Voices captured in private hallways. Envelopes passed under tables. Documents exchanged with quick glances and silent nods. First came the audio. A recording gritty but clear of Judge Barrett Trask laughing over a bourbon glass. "You want justice?" he says to a man in a tailored suit, his tone condescending. "Then stop sending me kids who can't afford clean shoes, much less legal counsel. Tell your donors next time I prefer cash, not checks." Then came the transactions, financial records crisp and undeniable. A series of wire transfers from a private construction firm. Several of their cases had conveniently ended up in Trask's courtroom, each one followed by a suspiciously favorable ruling. Redacted accounts, offshore holders, bundled LLCs. And then the video, the one no one could explain away. Trask in his chambers. Flint sitting across from him. A man from the firm handing over a document. "You deliver this one clean," the man says. "No appeals. We'll make sure your re-election coffers are topped off." No denial, just a nod from Trask, and a smirk. The courtroom went still again, but not in silence this time. In collapse. Naomi didn't flinch. Boone leaned back against the wall like he'd just seen a ghost. Even Flint, who moments earlier had spoken with the confidence of a man standing on bedrock, had gone pale. Marcus stood slowly and addressed the federal agents in the room. "All this data," he said, voice even but firm, "was retrieved under Protocol 048F. Internal investigation. Full chain of custody. Every frame, every file legally obtained, logged and transmitted through secure federal channels." One of the agents nodded. Quietly, he stepped forward, removed a device from his jacket, and scanned a small black ID card Marcus handed over. It beeped once. Clearance confirmed. Then Isaiah stood. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he walked to the center of the room. Slowly. Unrushed. The same calm he'd worn like armor now looked like something else purpose. He reached into his jacket again and held out a single card. Not plastic. Not state-issued. It was matte gray edged in silver. A field ID. The agent scanned it. A second beep. The agent looked up, voice cool and certain. Identification confirmed. Internal clearance. Central Intelligence. Flint sat back stunned. Trask didn't move. His jaw worked once, then again, but no words came. Isaiah turned to him, his voice low, steady, like someone speaking not just to a man, but to a weight that had been sitting on the backs of people for too long. "I'm not here to threaten your court," he said. "I'm here to reveal what it's become." His eyes didn't leave Trask's. "I don't break systems. I expose them." No one interrupted, because there was nothing left to say. This wasn't an outburst. This wasn't a defense. This was revelation. And for the first time in a very long time, Barrett Trask, the man who thought he owned the rules, sat quietly, knowing for once the room was no longer his. The room didn't erupt. There were no outbursts, no cheers, not even a whisper of applause. What settled over that courtroom was something far heavier than noise. It was silence. A silence that didn't demand attention, but commanded it. One of the federal agents moved forward, calm, deliberate. He walked past the bench where Judge Barrett Trask still sat, then placed a single envelope in front of him. The words were few but final. "As of this moment, you are suspended pending full federal investigation." Trask blinked. Just once. He didn't stand. He didn't protest. For the first time in a courtroom he had ruled for decades, he was no longer in control. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Flint rose from his seat, his face pale, unreadable. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked toward the door, disappearing without the weight of closing arguments or final words. Naomi, still seated behind her screen, kept her eyes on the data transfer bar that now showed complete. Her copy of the evidence secure. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had done her part. And in her silence, something powerful had been restored. Then Isaiah stood. There was no tension in his movement, no drama, no triumph, just purpose. He didn't look to the agents, didn't look to Trask. He reached down calmly and removed the cuffs from his own wrists, a quiet act that seemed to echo louder than the judge's gavel ever had. No one moved to stop him. No one had the right. He looked around the room slowly, eyes sweeping across the faces that had judged him, dismissed him, feared him. Some looked down, others looked away. But a few, just a few, held his gaze not with guilt, but with something closer to respect. Officer Boone stepped forward. His voice was quiet, rough from what felt like hours of holding in more than he could say. "We owe you more than an apology. Isaiah didn't answer. Not because he couldn't, but because in that moment words would have only made the silence smaller. He turned to leave his steps steady, unhurried. The sound of his shoes on the polished courtroom floor was the only thing that moved in the space behind him. No one tried to stop him. No one could, because this was no longer the trial of a quiet black man. It was the trial of a system, and for once, that system cloaked in robes and power had been forced to bow, not to pressure, not to privilege, but to truth. Isaiah stepped outside into the sharp afternoon light. It hit his face not like freedom, but like memory, too bright, too clear. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the cinder-block building behind him still humming with tension. Reporters were waiting, some with notepads, some with questions already sharpened like knives. But they didn't rush. They watched him first, trying to figure him out. Was he guilty? Innocent, dangerous, a hero, a threat. Isaiah didn't offer any headline. He looked out across the crowd, scanning without searching. His hands were no longer cuffed, but they stayed at his sides, steady, grounded. Marcus stepped out behind him, quieter than usual. He stopped beside Isaiah, kept his eyes forward. "So, is it over?" he asked low enough not to invite the microphones. Isaiah took a breath, and for a moment he didn't answer. He watched a young black boy across the street holding his mother's hand, eyes wide, staring straight at him. "No," Isaiah finally said. "It's not over. But maybe next time someone like me walks into a courtroom in silence, the system will pause before it decides what kind of man that is. Sometimes all you need is a pause." Naomi stepped through the heavy courthouse doors. She had a look on her face that wasn't relief, not exactly, but something clearer, something earned. She raised her phone slightly and walked toward them. "They just confirmed," she said, 5 cases, all dismissed by Trask in the last decade. They're being reopened under judicial review." Isaiah's shoulders didn't rise, his jaw didn't clench, but in his chest something settled. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just gravity. He nodded once. "Good. That's where this was always supposed to lead." A reporter finally stepped forward, a tall man with a dark tie and rehearsed tone. "Mr. Cole, now that your identity has been confirmed and Trask has been suspended, do you feel proud of what you've done today?" Isaiah turned toward him slowly. He looked the man in the eye, not aggressively, not with spite, but with the weight of everything he had carried in silence. "I didn't do it to feel proud," he said. "I didn't do it to feel anything. I did it because silence only protects power. And power, when it goes unchecked, starts to rot." He took a few steps down the stairs, then stopped again. Looked not at the reporter, but at the crowd beyond the ones without cameras, the ones who had watched quietly from the sidewalk. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm unfinished business." That landed like a quiet storm. Marcus let out a breath through his nose, then smiled. "You always gotta say something that sticks," he muttered. Isaiah almost smiled back, but not quite. "It only sticks if people carry it." He turned slightly toward Naomi. "How long before they bury this?" Naomi hesitated. "Depends on how loud people are." Isaiah looked towards the young boy again. The child was still watching him, still holding his mother's hand, but this time, he smiled. Isaiah lowered his head for a second, then turned his back to the courthouse. Not to reject it, but to leave it behind, because the real work was never meant to stay inside those walls. As he and Marcus started walking down the street, Naomi paused to check another message. Her expression shifted. Not panic, but something she hadn't expected. She jogged up to them. "Isaiah," she said. "There's something else. A 6th case. Not on the original list." Isaiah stopped, turned to face her. "What is it?" It was filed under a sealed record. A whistleblower from 10 years ago. "Your brother." Isaiah didn't speak. Naomi added, "They're opening it. Not because of today. Because of what he filed back then. His testimony was never destroyed. Just buried." Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. Maybe, he whispered, that's how the system falls. Not with a bang, but by unburying what they hoped we'd forget. He turned again now, walking not just away from the courthouse, but toward something bigger. The boy across the street watched him disappear into the crowd, and for the first time, someone in that child's life would grow up knowing that silence can break stone. Justice, Isaiah knew, wasn't a moment. It was a memory. One loud enough to be passed down. The crowd had started to thin. Reporters moved on to edit rooms' headlines already forming in their minds. The courthouse steps, once crowded with tension and noise, began to exhale. People left in quiet pairs. Some lingered longer than they needed to, unsure what they had just witnessed, but knowing it mattered. Isaiah stood beneath a streetlight that hadn't yet turned on. The sun was still up, but just barely. Its last streaks of gold caught the edges of his jacket as if the light itself had paused to listen one last time. A small voice broke the stillness. "Are you a cop?" Isaiah turned slowly. It wasn't loud, but it was direct, the kind of question only a child would ask with such certainty. The boy was maybe 7, brown skin, wide eyes, holding a juice box with both hands like it was something sacred. He'd been standing behind the crowd the whole time. His mother hovered nearby, unsure whether to step forward or let this moment happen. Isaiah knelt a little to meet the boy's gaze. "No," he said softly. "I used to work for people who kept secrets. But now, I just keep the truth for myself." The boy blinked like he was trying to decide if that was better or worse. He looked down at his juice box, then back at Isaiah. "Did you win?" Isaiah looked at him, then past him, at the courthouse, at the sky, at the ghosts that followed him everywhere he went. He didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. After a moment, he said, "I didn't win. But I didn't lose either. I just made sure someone listened." The boy nodded, satisfied in a way only a child can be when things feel fair, even if they don't fully understand why. "I'm gonna tell the truth, too," the boy added, "even when people don't want me to." Isaiah smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides as much as it shows. He reached out and gently tapped the boy's shoulder. "That's how it starts," he said. "Just don't forget who you are when the room tries to tell you who you're not." The boy's mother stepped closer, hand lightly resting on her son's back. She looked at Isaiah, eyes full of a quiet gratitude too deep for words, and led the boy away. Isaiah stood again. The courthouse doors were closed now. The echo of what happened inside still hung in the air like a song no one quite finished singing. Naomi came out last. She didn't speak, just walked with him to the end of the block. When they reached the corner, she stopped. "You knew it might not work," she said quietly. "You knew they could have shut you down." Isaiah didn't look surprised. He simply nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "But I also knew silence wasn't going to fix anything." Naomi watched him for a moment. And now, Isaiah looked down the empty street. "Now," he said, "I let the echo do its work." She nodded, then walked away. Isaiah stayed. There was no music, no cheering, no applause. Just a man in a quiet city beneath a sky losing color, carrying something no one else could see. He didn't walk off like a hero. He just remained. And somewhere down the block, a boy looked back, just once. That was enough. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that speak the least, but carry the weight of truth louder than any courtroom gavel. Isaiah's story reminds us that justice isn't always loud, fast, or even fair. Sometimes it comes in quiet resistance, in holding your ground when the system wants you to disappear. If this story moved you, if it made you pause even for a moment, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to MX Stories, where we bring powerful voices and untold truths to light. Your support isn't just a click. It gives our team the strength to keep crafting stories that matter. Stories that echo long after the screen fades to black. Because here at MX, we don't just tell stories. We remember. And we make sure the world remembers too.